Is October 8th, Tuesday. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm here with Mr.
Lehner, Gerard M. Lehner.
Gerard Lehner at his home in Latham, New York. Mr. Lehner, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, sir.
I'm Ed, by the way, so we can do that.
Okay, Ed.
Our purpose here is to just sort of reflect and reminisce on some of your military experiences for part of this Library of Congress project. I've got a few sort of prompting questions to ask, and then we'll just chat.
Alrighty.
So what branch of service were you in? When did you serve? What wars were you involved in?
I was in the U.S. Navy. I enlisted in 1942 and served all through, from there through to World War II. And then I joined the Naval Reserve and was recalled in the Korean War and served 13 months there. The first time in World War II, I was in the Pacific all the time. Korean War, I was in the Atlantic. I didn't get to Korea. Different ocean, I'll tell you that much that way. Yeah, I was aboard the USS the Sullivans, named for the 5 Sullivan brothers that were killed on the Juno, right? I commissioned her in '43 and was at sea on her for 21 months without making a liberty.
Wow.
A long time, right? And 18 of those months were in the forward area in combat in the Pacific Ocean. I served in all the campaigns from the Marshall Islands right up past Okinawa. And we came back to the West Coast for a complete overhaul before we were going to invade Japan.
Okay.
And while I was home on 30-day leave, Mr. Truman was nice enough to take care of the Japanese with the bomb, and the war was over.
Okay.
Right? I thank him all the time.
Let me go back into some of the details on some of this. You joined in 1942.
Yes.
You said. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I enlisted.
Okay.
I enlisted.
And where were you living at the time when you joined?
I was living in Springfield Gardens, Long Island, New York.
Mm-hmm. And did you went from there to where for basically?
Okay, I went from the New York City recruiting to Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
First, when I enlisted, they swore me in and they put me on inactive duty for about a month until they had room in a boot camp. And then they called me up a couple of days before Christmas. And I went up to Great Lakes, spent boots up there in Great Lakes.
Can you remember what kind of thing were you thinking about at the time? Were all your buddies enlisting, and was that sort of was it an adventure, or how did you feel about it? Do you remember?
Well, I think that, as you say, a lot of the fellas were enlisting, and I graduated from high school and I went to work with the Western Electric Company, and I spent 10 months with them, and then enlisted. I thought it was the thing to do. Mm-hmm. Of course, I was just about 19, right? So it had to be an adventure too at that time.
Was it a big surprise? I mean, was boot camp a surprise or a shock to you, or did you?
No, I had spoken to other fellows that had been in boots, so I pretty much knew what was going to go on, although it was the first time I was away from home for any length of time. So it was a big change, big change in life, right? And Green Bay in December, or where Great Lakes was up there, was awful cold and windy. I'll say that, right? But, you know, they have to train you, and that's where we were. And I was in a company of a whole bunch of fellows. In fact, I think 5 or 6 of them were right from New York, where I was. I was not acquainted with them before, but we traveled to Great Lakes together, and we were in the same boot company all through there. And some of them, 3 of them I think, went to electrical school with me out of Great Lakes.
Was that your specialty?
That's what I had asked for.
Okay.
The Western Electric Company was a bell system outfit. I worked telephone. And I asked for electrical stuff, and they sent me to Purdue University.
Yeah.
So I come out of there as a third-class petty officer. And then I went to the Con Edison Company in New York City. What they wanted to do was give us a taste of what generating was like with generating equipment. So I spent 3 months in one of the big electrical generating plants in New York, 40th Street and First Avenue. And all I did was walk around with a man that worked there. I didn't do any work. The union wouldn't let me do that. But I just observed everything they did, you know. Then after that, I was on Pier 92 in New York in what they called receiving ships, waiting for assignment. And I was assigned to the USS the Sullivans, which hadn't been commissioned yet. They was just finishing building.
That's a DE?
A destroyer.
Okay, it was a destroyer.
A DD, yeah,
okay.
a DD. Yeah, my DE experiences during the Korean War.
Okay.
So that's what I got in the Korean War, right?
So you were, the training, from the time you enlisted, you went to boot camp, until the time you got your assignment on the destroyer, how long did that training?
Well, I think the boot camp at that time was about 12 or 14 weeks. And then electrical school was another 3 or 4 months, I guess. And then with the Edison Company it was 2 months maybe. So I was in California on Goat Island, or Treasure Island, they call it today, waiting for the Sullivans. I was assigned to the crew there, pre-commissioning crew. And the Sullivans was commissioned in September of '43. So I went in December '42, so we're talking 9 months.
9 months, 9 or 10 months.
Yeah,
Okay.
training beforehand.
So then you got on a brand new.
Yeah, it was new
mission ship.
construction, yeah, brand new construction, right?
Call you guys plank holders?
Plank owners.
Plank owners?
Yeah, yeah, I wear one on my cap, plank owner.
Good for you.
Right, everybody asks me, what's that mean? And I keep telling them, well, it goes way back when they used to bring boards and make the ships, and they worked on them that way.
So, did you have any idea what to expect going aboard a destroyer? Had you part of
No,
your
I had never been. The only thing on the water I was ever on was the old Hudson River daylight boats coming up and down the Hudson River. So I was kind of looking forward to it, though. It was, well, again, a great adventure, I guess, for young people, young men, you know. Life was a lot different than what I had spent at home. You didn't have much room to keep your things. The lockers were very small.
How did you manage that? You just do without things?
Well, you only had what you could carry in a sea bag, so you didn't need a lot of room. If the Navy told you how to, we didn't fold our clothes. That time we rolled them up and tied them with clothes stops, and that's the best way to keep them in a sea bag. Pardon me. And of course they told us, you know, you're going to be sleeping in a hammock, you got to carry the hammock with you and everything, mattresses, you all had to carry it. We made a big package, that sea bag, with the hammock and mattress around it, blankets and all. When we got aboard ship, though, they didn't use hammocks. The newer construction had bunks, 3 high bunks. So one of the first things they did was take our hammocks away from us, take the mattresses, put them on the bunks. So we had a comfortable place to sleep. I don't know how I would have made out in a hammock, but there wasn't much of a place to sleep in, right?
So when you first went aboard the ship, this was brand new, so there must have been sea trials and a lot of training on it before?
Oh yeah, well, the crew, there were a lot of men that knew what they were doing were in the crew. Of course, they couldn't man the whole ship with all new people. Even though some of us were rated, we'd never been on a ship, so there were a whole, like a cadre of people that knew what they were doing and were able to instruct us. because those newcomers, we didn't know where anything was on a ship. We had to find out that way, right? So we did go through what they call shakedown in the Navy. You go out and you try the ship, try everything, make sure everything works all right. Then you get a short time to try and fix anything that's not working properly before you get an assignment that would take you into harm's way any place. You know?
So during that time, were you going out and then coming back into port? Or were you
Yes, we were. The ship was commissioned in San Francisco. Pardon me. In San Francisco, and we'd be out maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, come back in. We could make liberty in the city, then back aboard again, and out we'd go, you know, until the Navy really accepted the ship and was satisfied that it was going to work properly.
And how did you find your officers and crew? Did you get to, were you comfortable with them?
Oh yeah, I think I was, because I didn't know any better anyway. You know, that's the first time in a situation. But over the years that I was aboard, we had a fine crew. We've been shipmates for 60-some years, and we still meet in reunions. Oh yeah, yeah. There's something about being in combat that holds men together. Yeah. You depend on them. You put your life in their hands, officers and men both, right? And we did have a fine group of officers. We only had, well, during the war, we had 2 captains, 2 commanding officers, and they were both oriented toward the white hats. They wanted to make sure the men were taken care of. A lot of the officers didn't like the commanding officers too much because he really put his foot down with them. But the white hats he took care of, because he knew as well as we did that we were in the ship, you know. But I can remember senior petty officers and other officers too that did all they could to help young guys. And well, we depended on them for a lot of training that we needed, but they were always after us to advance, take the test, get a rate. Because he used to tell us, it's wartime. You'll be able to get rates real quick during the war. Right? So that way, I can't say anything about any officers. There were none I didn't like. Some I got annoyed with once in a while, but most of the time, it was real good, right? They looked out for us. We tried to look out for them too.
So we left California finally. You shut
Yes.
down and you headed out to the Pacific?
We went to Hawaii. That was the first run of any long distance we made. And in Hawaii, we joined up with other carriers and cruisers, and we headed for the Marshall Islands. They were going to invade the Marshall Islands at that time, right? So we did all kinds of training and operations on the way out to the Pacific, or the rest of the Pacific anyway. So I think we felt pretty comfortable with the ship. You know, it worked okay. We still didn't know what was out there to come, but we got out there all right.
Did you find out what was out there?
Yes, we did.
What was that like?
Well, we operated with the carriers most of the time, carriers and the battleships. We were in on most of the amphibious invasions, all kinds of airstrikes all over. Favorite expression of one of the old chiefs, I knew it, he says combat was, or being in the Navy out there was 95% boredom and 10% or 5% sheer terror, you know. But it didn't last long. One thing in the Navy, it wasn't like friends of mine that were in the Army and the Marine Corps. They were in constant combat all the time, right? The Navy was different. We had intensive combat for short periods of time, maybe an hour, 2 hours, mostly based on how much fuel the enemy airplanes had. You know, when they started running on fuel, they'd have to break off, right? We only gotten a few actions in surface, but even those went fast too. Seemed to go
So
fast.
mostly
you know.
air attacks?
Mostly air attacks, yes. Pardon me.
So what was your job aboard ship at this point?
My job as an electrician was to stand watches on the generating and switchboards, maintain all the electrical equipment, maintain the interior communications, engine order telegraphs, rotor angle indicators, all that kind of stuff, right? My name was called quite a few times, get up to the bridge. Every time something didn't work up there, boom, they'd call one of us, and we'd get up there and do what we could to fix it. We had support though too. We had destroyer tenders out, and as we advanced up in the Pacific, the tenders all moved up into the different atolls. Majuro, Ulithi, and Waitak. They were there, and we used them as fleet bases. They were nothing more than coral islands with a bay in between where they could get a lot of ships. But if we got a problem we couldn't handle, and it would have to be a big one because we could handle small problems, the tenders would help us out. They kept parts. We kept parts too, but they had a lot more than we did, right? So that worked out.
What was your battle station?
My first battle station was on the 36-inch searchlights. I got a good view of everything that was going on and hoped we never had to turn the searchlights on because they were awful big lights and would attract all kinds of things, right? And myself and a fellow by the name of Henry Sullivan, he was a Sullivan. We had 23 Sullivans aboard. They used to call roll by initials, HFJC. You know. But at one time, I think the Navy was going to try and man the whole ship with Sullivans, but I don't think they could get that many, right?
Can we digress for a second?
Sure.
I've heard of this, but can you tell me a little bit more about the Sullivans and how that ship came to be named for them?
Well, the 5 boys, 2 of the boys had been in the Navy previous to Pearl Harbor. And at that time, they had put in their enlistments and they were out. At Pearl Harbor, they had a friend or 2 friends that were, I think, killed or wounded at Pearl Harbor. So they decided they were going to get in service. The 2 boys that had been in the Navy decided they were going back, and the other 3 were going with them. Because they didn't want to do anything by themselves. They always wanted to be together. In fact, their motto was, "We stick together." And that's the motto of all the crews that have been on the Sullivans. And the Sullivans was actually, it was decommissioned, put in mothballs after the war, was recommissioned in '51, was in service again through the Korean War, all the way through to 1965. So in our association, we have a lot of, I say younger today, they're getting older too, but a lot of younger people. And we have a new ship, a new Sullivans. It's a guided missile destroyer. And a lot of those people belong to our association too already. They've either left the Navy or transferred someplace, but they keep in touch with the crews. That seems to be, I don't know, it's not just the Sullivans that has an association like that. Most ships do. When guys spend time together on a ship, they get a lot closer than others, you know. And it's a smaller group, 300 in our case, not like a division in the Army where there's 11,000, something like that, you know.
And there's that critical shared experience.
Yeah, I think so. You're close together most of the time, you know. You know, everybody knows one another, and that's what keeps us the way we are.
So can you recall what was in your mind the first time you came under attack?
Yeah, what's going to happen here, right? It's funny, by the time I got my first general quarters station on the searchlights, that didn't last for long, and it wound up in an engine space, the after engine room on the distribution boards down there. And at general quarters, we probably had 10, 12 guys in the engine room. Of course, we had machinist mates and all down there also. That's funny, a destroyer, they call them tin cans, you know. So there's no armor at all on a tin can. It's very, very narrow, right? But when they said, hey, the torpedo planes are coming in from the starboard side, we'd all move over to the port side as though it would do any good. Wouldn't do any good, but we did it, right? But we did have talkers in all those spaces, so we knew what was going on. Somebody was always on the communication line, telephone talkers.
To keep you posted as to what's happening?
Not to keep us posted, to have communications between the bridge and the engine spaces for different kind of maneuvering and all, you know. Besides the electrical telegraphs they had back and forth, they did have voice communications, right? But the guy, he'd keep us informed what was going on. And the space was small enough so you could hear when they passed orders back and forth. You knew what it was, you know, you knew what was going on. Anyway, and then later, I think maybe a year later, my general quarters station was in the IC room, interior communications room, where the gyro was, and all the switchboard there was for all the interior communications. The sound-powered telephones, engine order telegraph, rudder angle indicators, everything went through there. And in the same space was the manual computer for the guns that took ranges and all, and actually aimed the guns, set the fuses and everything. The fire controlman ran that. So at general quarters there were probably 6 maybe fire controlmen in there and myself in that room. And that was 2 decks down with only a little scuttle to get out of if we had to, right? But you didn't think about that too much, that kind of stuff.
You didn't dwell on that, right? I mean, you were trained, you knew what your job was, so you did your job.
Yeah, and there was enough to do most of the time to keep you busy. But I don't think you could. Anybody that dwelled on it, you'd have mental problems after a while. You couldn't do it. And all the time I was aboard ship, maybe 1 or 2 fellas broke, but not many at all. And go ahead.
Do you have any idea how many separate times you were in action or under attack?
I got a list if you want to see it. The list goes, they published a list in 1944 and distributed to us. It was headed not for publication, you know, but it listed all the actions we were in, and it went up to, trying to remember how late. Of course, after they published that, we were still in action for a couple of months more. I don't know, it's probably 35, 40 actions that they listed like that. Besides what went on, that wasn't included in their list, you know. We had, a lot of times, there were things going on, we'd find a mine floating in the ocean. Had to get everybody up shooting at it, trying to blow up the mines, right? After some of the invasions, they had things they made barges out of. They were big metal squares that floated. They joined them all together, make as big a barge as they could. They'd make piers out of them and everything. Every once in a while you'd find one of them floating around the ocean, got away from somebody, you know. We'd have to sink that. Or you'd get, some pilots would report something in the water, and we'd go looking for that, right? We'd go out picking up pilots that ran out of gas.
Let me stop you just for a
Sure.
second.
Well,
Well, we were talking about your battle station and
things that went on in between actions. Yeah.
I guess, well, among other things, you said that most of the attacks against you were airborne. Did submarines ever get involved in?
Oh, yes. Submarines were a constant worry. We were always picking up sound contacts. The sonar men would pick up contacts. And of course, we steamed in a task group, which had the carriers and the wagons in the center of a circle, and the destroyers and the cruisers in a circle around it. That way we could turn in any direction and still maintain that, because we'd all turn at the same time. But if a ship on the other side of the task group picked up a sonar contact, well, they'd be sent out to check it. Any ship that picked up a contact would go after it, probably with another ship too. So we were constantly trying to find submarines.
Did you mostly chase them off, or did you wind up...
We never knew what happened to them because many times we dropped depth charges on them. But back then, with the depth charges they used, they operated from the depth of the water. So you'd have to estimate how deep submarine was, drop the depth charges, and they dropped them in patterns. They dropped them off the fantail, then 3 on each side to the sides, and then off the fantail again, and make a big ring of explosions. And they went off when they got to a certain depth, but you didn't know whether you got a submarine or not, unless something popped up from the submarine or the submarine itself broached, you know. Later on, in the Korean War, we had what they called hedgehogs. They were bombs that were fired off the front of the ship in a pattern, and those were contact explosives. If one of them went off, you knew you hit something. Right? But we never knew. We just dropped the things, got great big explosions in the water, looked good all the time, but we never know.
What would happen to those if they didn't hit a submarine and instead just fell to the seafloor?
They would just go down to the seafloor.
Would they go off then when they hit bottom?
I really don't know, because they put them on in the Korean War, and we never fired them in anger while I was on the ship.
Just thinking there could be a lot of unexploded ordnance around.
Oh, I imagine there is. All kinds of shells and everything else. All the oceans of the world must be full of that stuff. Yeah.
So in these actions, like these here, did your ship take direct hits?
Not a hit. Now, we always said that those 5 boys were looking over us. We were through 21 months at sea and 18 months of combat action. We never got hit with anything but pieces of shrapnel that fell down from the anti-aircraft fire that we were sending up. We never had anybody that was critically injured on the ship. And we all said that was the luck of the Irish. Those Irish boys were looking over us, right? And the fact is that sometimes they would send ships forward of the group, picket ships, they were. And we'd be out there with our radar looking for planes coming in. When the planes come in, we'd warn the ships in back of us, and they usually had 2 or 3 planes, what they call the combat air patrol. We could direct them to where these planes were coming, and they'd go after them to try and get them, right? We'd be out there maybe 2 or 3 days, then go back, and somebody else would come out, and they'd get hit out there. We'd go back out, we wouldn't get hit. Somebody else would go out, they'd get hit. It sure was the luck of the Irish or something. Somebody was looking over us. We were very, very fortunate that way.
What was shipboard life like under these combat patrol type situations or in the convoys?
Well, it was you were busy maintaining equipment or standing watches. If you weren't maintaining equipment, you had assigned watches. You were 4 on, 4 off, 4 on, 4 off, and that was a routine. You did that all the time. When you were off watch, you did what work you had to do or what you could accomplish, and you had leisure time. Well, leisure time, there was no place to go. You know, the ship was only 35 feet wide, 250, 300 foot long.
How did you occupy your leisure time?
Well, our guys played cards, and we, again, the captains made sure that we had music. They had a loudspeaker system throughout the ship. They had sets of records. They could play records for us. We had a library. They put out a daily newspaper while the paper lasted until it could get more paper. But they always kept us informed. And something else that both captains did They made sure we knew where we were, what we were doing, when we were going to do it, how many others would be with us, what we could expect from the enemy. We were well informed. All ships weren't. We'd go up against alongside a carrier or a battleship to take fuel or stores from them, and those guys would be hollering down to them, "Where are we? What are we doing out here? Where are we?" They didn't seem to know what was going on much at all, but we always did. A small ship. The officers would tell us all the time, you know what, the captains used to post charts, put charts up on the bulkheads, and they had a guy assigned every day to mark where we were on the chart. So we knew that way.
And you appreciated that? I mean,
Oh, absolutely, because you knew what you were doing. You know, if you were in the dark about what was going on,
yeah.
that'd be worse than what it was. You know, so they kept us informed, and it helped. It really did
Were you
help.
able to maintain any contact with home, with your families?
Mail, just mail was the only way. Anytime you went near a bigger ship, or you got in with logistical ships, tankers, freighters, they usually had mail. They'd send the mail out of the States, and hoping it would catch up. It might take 2 months to catch up to you, but it would. We used to appreciate that all the time. We had movies. Whenever you got near another ship, you would swap movies. We showed movies all the time. I had to run the camera. Electrician, well, either me or some other electrician, we ran the cameras, the projectors, I mean. And there was enough to do. Sit around.
Did they feed you well?
Oh, the Navy? Oh, yeah. I, to this day, say that the cooks and bakers in the Navy were the best in the world. I can only remember at all that time out there, I can only remember twice, I think, where we had to eat sandwiches. And those are in combat situations where the cooks and bakers were running guns and everything else, and they'd break them off to make sandwiches for us so we could have sandwiches and coffee. Otherwise, once in a typhoon, they couldn't feed us. The ship was rocking too much. Couldn't keep anything on the grills or the stoves.
But you would run out of supplies. That must be when the tenders and supply ships came in and resupplied.
It was a constant thing. Fuel was the biggest thing. At high speeds, we could probably only go 3 days without refueling. We were, the small boys, as they called the destroyers, were short-legged. We couldn't get too far without getting more fuel.
Do you know what was high speed for your destroyer? How fast that was?
Oh, 35, 36 knots. We had to go that fast to keep up with the carriers. The carriers and the big battle wagons, they could do that. And of course, they'd go as fast as they could to launch planes, get a little extra boost, you know. But we could do that. I think on shakedown, we did 35 knots with the safeties all tied down and everything else. We had a race with another destroyer. Glad nothing happened doing that. Jeez. But we were fast. They call them the greyhounds of the fleet, right? And we got all kinds of jobs that the big ships couldn't go do little things. So the small boys, we went and did all kinds of things that nobody else could do. We did it. Anytime something had to be investigated, we went here, there. Picked up pilots, picked up guys overboard, guys that fell overboard from other ships. We'd be looking for them. And I think that the guys that impressed me most in the Navy were the rescue swimmers. They had certain fellows designated as rescued swimmers. And when they called away swimmers, well, those guys were in the water right away. No special gear, nothing. If they were lucky to get trunks on, they did. Otherwise, they went in dungarees and all. And we'd go after men overboard, survivors from other ships, downed pilots, everything. Those guys, they were in the water all the time. And
And what was their role? Just to hold on to the guy and help him?
Get him back to the ship. Well, we would drop, in a case where there were men in the water, we would drop nets over the side that they could climb up on. And the swimmers would take lines out to them so we could pull them back to the ship. When they got back to the ship, other guys would go down the nets to help the guys get up. Because if they were in the water for a while, they don't have much strength left in their arms and legs to get up. But, and that happened quite often. It was, anytime a ship got hit someplace, you'd wind up with guys in the water. We pulled up many dead bodies, a lot of live guys too. We went looking for men. One time, one of the Typhoons, must have been in early 1945, we lost 3 ships. They rolled over and sank. 3 destroyers rolled over and sank. And we went looking for people. I don't think they picked up 30 men out of 800. They were gone. Rolled over, down they went. I worried about destroyer rolling over from then on. But we have been through a lot of rough weather. Rough weather on a small ship is tough, I'll tell you.
When you picked up either survivors or bodies, what did you do? I mean, did you?
Well, we had a medical officer, and we had 2 other men in the medical department, chief hospital corpsman, and I think Doc McRae was 2nd or 1st class hospitalman, right? And they took care of any injuries, you know, that we could. But we did have access to the bigger ships. We could transfer people to it on high lines, connect the line across, send them over in a Stokes stretcher, or whatever. Dead bodies we buried. Some guys, we picked them up, they were injured, they died aboard, we buried them too. Other fellas, at one time, when the Houston got hit, we picked up 15 men from the Houston. Well, first, that's a big story there. The Canberra got hit first. And we escorted the Houston over to take the Canberra's place. They were both cruisers. And then we were assigned to help the Canberra get out of the action space, but we were still within distance of the land-based planes, the Japanese planes. And the next night, the Houston got hit with torpedoes, aerial torpedoes probably. And then we had to go back and get the Houston, bring her back out. We picked up 15 men from the Houston out of the water, and a couple of dead bodies. Another night later, under attack, the Houston got hit again. We picked up another 1 or 2 dozen men out of the water, dead bodies, and then looked like the Houston was going to sink. So we went alongside, 1 or 2 other destroyers went alongside, and we took off about 100 men, and they left a crew aboard just in case they could try to save it, you know. And they did save it. They saved it. But we transferred those guys back to the Houston. I don't know if they all went back. Some we sent to the Indianapolis. I remember that. When the Bunker Hill was hit, we picked up 144 men out of the water then, and eventually transferred them back to the Bunker Hill, I think too. They saved her. They took her out of there. In the beginning of the war, when ships were hit bad, we sunk them. We sank the ships because they held us up. They didn't want to. But I think they were losing too many ships, so they decided we're going to do something to keep these ships, right? So from then on, you didn't just sink a ship. I think Midway was probably the last place where they sank ships to get rid of them, our own ships. You know? And after that, we kept them going if we could. And those 2 cruisers, when we finally got them, we went back, I don't know, 70, 80 miles away, still under attack from Japanese planes. And they called it the Cripples, something. Anyway, the whole task group laid over the horizon, hoping that the Jap fleet would come out to get these cruisers. There were 4 or 5 destroyers with them, I guess. And we could do 4 knots. We eventually got the tugs, and the tugboats took them under tow. We were doing 4 knots under attack all the time. And here we were bait out there, you know. The rest of the ships are waiting for the Japs to come out. But they didn't, thank goodness. We would have been real bait. They're really something. Right?
Was that like terrifying to you, or was it again a case of this?
Well, I
is
think
your
you
job?
got mad because, damn it, they were sinking our ships, you know, and killing our guys. Yeah, you worried about it, but again, you didn't dwell on it because you couldn't. It was too much to do, right? And I can remember one time I was in a repair party. We had, on a destroyer, we had 2 repair parties, one forward, one aft. If you took any kind of a hit, it was up to the repair parties to fix it, keep the ship from sinking, right? And they kept us, we were in a deck house, so we were out of the way of shrapnel and that kind of stuff. But we were firing at torpedo planes, and on the forward part of the ship, we had 2 5-inch guns. Number 2 gun had 2 40 millimeters, one on the starboard, one on the port side. And a second loader on the starboard gun got flash burned. The 5-inch gun was over the top of him and went off. Flash burned his whole back. They took him off the gun mount. The chief says, "Lehner, get up there, take that guy's place." So I went up there and I was worried about that gun, that number 2 gun going off over the top of me. But we got more torpedo planes coming in, and the torpedo planes are low, they're down low, coming in close. I never heard that number 2 gun going off. I was so busy handing shells to that guy on that 40 millimeter. Oh. But that's what happens, I think, in action. You get busy doing what you have to do. Yeah. So, you know, later on you think, boy, what could happen there, you know? But thank God it didn't, not with me.
During all this time when these actions were taking place, were you at sea continuously, or
yes.
Did you ever get into port anywhere, any liberty?
Not ports, no liberties. As we advanced through the different islands in the Pacific, the Marshalls, the Carolinas, the Marianas, the Navy would pick one of the islands in the atolls that was big enough to hold a fleet. And we'd use that like a port. It was nothing but a sandy coral island, but it was big enough to get the ships in out of weather. It's strange to say that because when we did get weather, we'd all have to go to sea anyway to ride it out. They wouldn't let you stay in the harbor. But we'd go back to there, and a lot of those islands, like Majuro and Wadok again, Ulithi, the logistical ships would stay there. The tankers, the oilers, and all. And we'd go in there to take supplies, take ammunition. When we first went out, as I recall, the tankers would come out and refuel us because we'd take fuel from the bigger ships, but then after a while they would get low too. So the tankers would come out and we'd refuel from the tankers, they'd refuel the carriers, and we could go another maybe week, a week and a half without worrying, because we could get it from the bigger ships, right? And then they started sending out, and we'd have to go back to Ulithi. So we got a day or so when the ship wasn't rocking so much. You know? Then they started sending out the ships that had food on them. They'd transfer food to us. And then the next thing, they're sending ships out with ammunition. So that's why we didn't have to go back at all. They sent everything right out to us. Today, they get it even faster. They got aerial replenishment. The helicopters lower stuff down to them. They do good.
In those atolls, if that was the base,
yeah.
You know, was that an opportunity for you to get off the ship anyway, to get on the ground, or?
Well, we used to. They would put 15 guys in a whaleboat with 2 cases of beer. You'd go over to the sand, you'd drink a couple of cans of beer, you come back to the ship. Some of the bigger places, Ulithi, I think it was one place, they had what they call the recreation area. It was a place that the Seabees flattened out. You could play softball. Wasn't too good though. You'd go up, you'd be at sea for 2 months. You'd go in, they'd send you ashore. You'd play softball all day long. The next couple of days you could hardly move. You were stiffened right up, you know. But that was the extent of what we could do off the ship. You know, that was it.
So toward the end of that then came 1945. You were still out there, right?
Yeah, I was out there right up in Okinawa, past Okinawa. We made 2 or 3 raids on the Japanese islands with the carriers. We went up with the carriers, and they were bombing Japan.
Were you anticipating that you'd be part of an invasion force?
Oh yeah, well, that's all anybody ever talked about, especially with the islands. Every time we got closer to Japan, it was harder and harder for the Marines who were doing all the fighting out there in the Army to take those islands. And in Okinawa, it was horrendous. Because we used to listen to what the captains would do. They'd hook up our radios to the radios in the planes or in the tanks, so we could hear what was going on the shore, you know. And Okinawa was something else. And then the kamikazes started around that time. And we lost, a couple of 100 destroyers from kamikazes. And
did they come after you and your ship?
oh yeah, one time, well, anything they could get to, they'd come. Ships alongside of us, back of us, front of us. One time one came down, the captain ordered everybody off the bridge. He thought the plane was going right into the bridge. Just missed us, just went past. Well, I saw enough of that stuff happen. I'm glad it didn't happen to us and us fellas. It was rough, real rough. But it was not like the combat that the troops had on the islands. As I said previously, we got into a lot of hot and heavy stuff, but it usually was over 20 minutes, 25 minutes, you know. The sky would fill up with anti-aircraft fire because everybody'd be shooting at the planes. In fact, once I used to worry about our own ships shooting at us because we rode in that ring around the big ships, and the Japanese planes were going after the carriers and the battleships. That's what they wanted to get, you know. And everybody in that outside ring was shooting at the plane, and you were hoping the safety officer on those other turrets were going to stop them from shooting when they were pointing at us, you know. So.
Was it, that's probably a silly question, was it loud, noisy?
Oh,
Were you
yeah.
aware of that? Did it matter?
Oh, sure. Oh, it was noisy, especially on your own ship when the main battery is firing. Everything rocks, everything shakes. The air intakes are taking in all the cork from the shell casings, the smoke, the cordite, everything is in. After a while, all the electric bulbs we had to put on. We had heavy-duty bulbs. Didn't matter when they fired the main battery, the bulbs all went. And then the Navy sent out extensions, rubber-corded extensions. You put the lights in a rubber extension. Theory was that it would shake, you know, but they'd bust with that too. Everything went. And then after an action like that, the decks were full of brass because they were separate. The 5-inch guns that we had was a powder casing and an extra shell, and that's how they did it. And the guys in the turrets, when that hot shell came out, they'd bat it down, it'd go out of the turret onto the deck. 20mm shells, 40mm shell casings would be all over the place. We did more work then picking up brass, because they sent all the brass back to be reloaded. That was the biggest job, was picking up the shells, the hot shells, and getting rid of them again. Jeez, it was something, I'll tell you. It was an experience that I would never want to go through again, but I'm glad I did. I've made a lot of friends, and friendships that last. You know,
So you were sort of, everybody was sort of in their minds preparing for this invasion.
Oh, yeah.
And the bomb got dropped, and it looked like
Yeah.
it was going to be over, and then it was over.
It was over. I was on a train going back to California to get back on a ship. I was in North Platte, Nebraska, when the war ended. And we pulled in, and North Platte was I had been through that a couple of times, and they had the best place for troops that were moving. They had coffee, cake, donut, everything there. And the whole, I guess everybody in the town, every time a troop train came in, they would come down and serve the guys, you know, and out, it was good. Well, we were coming into North Platte, Nebraska. When we pulled in the station, all the bells started going off. You could see people running down the main streets to the station. And of course, we pulled out before they got there. But the war had ended, and the people were coming down.
So where'd you go from then? From that?
Well, I went back to Mare Island. That's where the ship was. We were being overhauled.
So you were being, why were you in North Platte at that time?
I was coming back from New York City back to the West Coast. I was on leave. I had 30 days leave.
Okay.
And when we came back from the Pacific, we got to Hawaii on the way back. We knew we were going for overhaul. They were going to replace some of the guns, take off one of the torpedo mounts, put more anti-aircraft stuff on. And the captain sent the executive officer from Hawaii on a plane back to the West Coast. And those of us that were in the first leave party, he took all the information where we wanted to go, how we wanted to go. They set up all the train tickets, plane tickets, everything to get us home while we were there. When we got back to Frisco, those of us in the first leave party, after we took off all the ammunition, we left the ship right away and got planes, trains. We had our tickets and everything. We went home. So we were coming back so the second leave party could come out when the war ended. And that was marvelous. I'll tell you. The only thing is, I got to Frisco, and when I turned in, I had like a day to go on my leave yet. And I can remember the Marine saying to me, "Don't come in here, you're not going to get out." They put everybody on restriction because they tore up San Francisco, I guess, when the war ended. And
so you stayed in the Navy a little bit longer then, and then you went.
Well, yeah, I was single, so I didn't have a lot of points. There were other fellows that left right after the war. If they had dependents and all, they went home on points. But I stayed for a couple of months, I think. And then they were going to mothball the ship, decommission it, put it in mothballs, keep it for the next time. And I think they even asked me to stay for 2 months because I was a senior electrician aboard while they mothballed it. And I recall as soon as they pulled down the commissioning pennant, I left and went home to Lido Beach in New York. I think that was one of the conditions I gave them. If I stay for 2 months, I want to be discharged in New York City, or near New York City. You know? And they agreed. The only thing they did when they decommissioned the ship, they closed the ship's books. So I couldn't draw any pays. So I couldn't even buy a ticket to get home, right? I was lucky one of the shipmates had enough money to lend me get a bus ticket from San Diego back to home. That was
so when
good.
you got home, what'd you do then?
Well, I got home in 46, January 46. I went back to work with Western Electric Company. Because I had been working for Western Electric. They put me on military leave. They paid the difference in my Navy pay and company pay for 3 months, I think, right? And as soon as I got home, I went right back to work with them. My job was there. I was a lucky one. I had a job there. And I got married in 47. We had 2 little girls, and I got called back in 1951. I had 30 days to go on my reserve enlistment. And they called me up, and I said, "Oh, only got 30 days. What are you going to do?" No, they said, "Truman gave you another year." Well, I should have got mad at Truman at that point, but I didn't. Because when he dropped that bomb, I thought he was the greatest man in the world.
So what did you do during the Korean?
We went to I was 2 days in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and I was instructed to bring back any uniforms or blankets or anything I had. And then they shipped me to Green Cove Springs, Florida, to get a DE, take a DE out of mothballs and recommission her. So I went down there, and we took the ship out. We recommissioned her. She didn't have a watertight hatch, so mothballing was not too good for the Snowden. I was on the Snowden, 246. And the only place I could say I ever saw a gunner's mate was afraid to fire a gun. We went out on sea trials, and to fire the guns, they put a big long lanyard on, and we had the old open mount 3-inch, loudest gun in the Navy, right? Put the lanyard on it, got behind the deck houses and pulled the lanyard. So nobody was around the gun.
You're afraid of it.
They didn't know what it would do after, you know, a couple of years sitting there, you know. So they did that. But then we went regular shakedown. And of course they changed my rating when I went back in the Navy. Sometime on my reserve enlistment, I was changed from electrician's mate, first class, to electrician's mate power, first class. When I went back in the Navy, when I told them that I was working for the Bell system, telephones, they changed my rate to interior communications, first class, right? The only thing with that was, IC takes care of the gyros, and I never worked on a gyro. We had special guys that went to school for gyros. I told them that, but they didn't care. We needed IC men, so I went. And when I got to Green Cove Springs, the executive officer who was assigned to the ship says, "Boy, we're glad to see you. The gyro's not working." I said, "You got the wrong guy." I said, 3 days ago, I was a regular electrician's mate, you know. But I was lucky. I got a third-class man who had been to gyro school, and he knew the gyro. So when he came aboard, I said, "There it is. That's yours. I'll take care of everything else." I had a striker too, so we managed for 13 months.
Back into the Pacific?
No, Atlantic. I was in the Atlantic. It was an altogether different ocean. I can remember other guys. The ship had mostly recalled reserves. The captain was regular. A couple of motor machinist mates were regular, because it was a straight diesel ship. And I can remember talking to guys who had been Atlantic sailors. You know, I said to them, "Boy, this ocean is terrible. It's rough. It can be." "Oh no," he says. "You know, wait," he says. "This isn't rough. This is fine." I said, "Oh, boy." And there was some rough spots in the Atlantic Ocean. I know that.
Well, what was your mission? What was the ship doing?
Our mission when I was aboard, it was training. We went to Guantanamo Bay. We left Newport, which was my home port. We left Newport with a destroyer squadron. But I was on a DE that could only do 20 knots. And those destroyers left us pretty soon because they were up to 30, 35. They were gone. So then they assigned us to the fast logistical ships. We couldn't keep up with them either. The tankers and the AKAs, we couldn't keep up to them. So we got down to Vieques, and they put us on anti-submarine patrol. We only had to do 8 knots in figure eights, right? And we were training most all the time. We were training.
Was there a real threat of submarines there, or?
Well, no. We were on maneuvers. We were maneuvering, right? Training. The Marines were landing on Vieques, and they were learning too, I guess. But then we came back to Philadelphia, and we went into the Philadelphia yard, and they cut out all the hatches and welded on all new hatches, replaced the mast, replaced the guns, replaced everything. And I was back in then 13 months, and I left the ship in Philadelphia. My enlistment was up, my reserve enlistment. Then I went home to the wife and kids and was happy about that.
And what have you done since then? What was your?
Well, I went back with the Western Electric Company again because they had put me on another military leave, and I spent 38 years with them and retired.
That's great.
And Western Electric Company, they broke up the Bell system right after I retired. Then I was retired from AT&T, Now I'm retired from Lucent Technologies, right? As long as they keep paying a pension, I don't care what they call it, as long as that's still there. And we had a few more children. I got 6 daughters. I got 14 grandchildren. I got 10 great-grandchildren. And we're busy.
Good for you. Good for you.
Real busy.
Okay, I guess, is there anything else that maybe we
That I
haven't
wanted to
talked
say about?
that you wanted to say? Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
I-
After that time in the Navy, a lot of people would say, well, I guess you don't like the Navy. But I did like the Navy. In fact, I belong to both the Destroyer Escort Sailors Association, the Tin Can Sailors, Sullivan's Association, Navy League, Naval Institute. I'm Navy oriented, even though I didn't stay in. My total service was a little more than 8 years, I guess, with the reserve and both active duties. But the Navy really wasn't for me as a career. I didn't see it that way.
Yeah.
It was a necessity, I think, and I can't really say I enjoyed it, but it was different, and it was an adventure, as you said in the
It's
beginning.
work worth doing.
It should, absolutely. Yeah, I've always felt that way. But again, I wasn't the grunt in the mud and all. I was on the Navy. We had 3 square meals a day, clean clothes. So it's altogether different
Yeah.
than that.
Okay, well, let's wrap that.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. This was a wonderful interview.